Gilbert Gottfried. This is Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Frank Santopadre, and we're once again recording at Nutmeg with our engineer, Frank Verderosa. Our guest this week is a true Renaissance man. He's an actor, producer, best-selling author, and the writer, director, and creator of long-running TV series, critically acclaimed stage productions, and popular feature films. While still in college, he joined the Cambridge Circus Revue and was soon performing alongside future comedy icons John Cleese and Graham Chapman. And at the tender age of 21, made his Broadway debut and his television debut on The Ed Sullivan Show, a broadcast seen by an impressive 70 million people. As an actor, he appeared in the original London production of Fiddler on the Roof, as well as British series such as Doctor in the House and Twice a Fortnight, with future Python, Terry Jones, and Michael Palin. He also scripted dozens of hours of television comedy along with writing partner Anthony J. Created the much-beloved BBC series Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. He directed dozens of award-winning stage productions, including Anna Christie, Arms and the Man, Three Men on a Horse, and The Glass Menagerie, earning the approval of Tennessee Williams himself. He's also directed 10 feature films, including Clue, The Whole Nine Yards, The Distinguished Gentleman, Greedy, Nuns on the Run, Sergeant Bilko, Trial and Error, and of course one of the most successful and oft-quoted comedies of the last 50 years, My Cousin Vinny. His new novel is called Samaritans, a satirical look at the state of the U.S. healthcare system, which the London Times called a book George Orwell would be proud of. Please welcome a comedy giant on both sides of the pond and a man who claims there's no such thing as bad taste when it comes to comedy. He obviously has never seen me. The multi-talented Jonathan Lynn.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm not sure that I should stay after all that. I'm not sure I can live up to that tremendous introduction.
You've done a lot of stuff, Jonathan.
I have. I've done a lot of stuff.
You're a prolific fellow.
Well, it keeps you off the streets.
Well, I'll say, I think one of the things that Gilbert would like to get out of the way, if I may, Gilbert.
Yes.
I think he was fascinated by the fact that you once played Adolf Hitler.
Yes. Well, I did. It was actually shortly after I played Mottle the Tailor in Fiddler on the Roof, which all my family were very proud of because I'm Jewish, and it was an enormous hit. And then shortly after that, I was cast as Hitler in a play called The Comedy of the Changing Years at the Royal Court Theatre, and none of them came to see that. It was a very difficult part to play because there was a scene, a 4-minute long speech in German, which I didn't speak. So I had to learn it. I had it translated for me, of course, so I knew, but it was his will that he dictated in the bunker before he died. And I had to memorize this 4 minutes of German. And at the Royal Court, it's the kind of place where the audience would understand it, some members of the audience. So that was a big feat of learning. That took me about 6 weeks to learn.
So the audience would know if you were mispronouncing every word.
Well, some of them would. I mean, most of them would be like me and wouldn't know at all. But there would be some people there, yes, who spoke German. Yes, it's a very educated audience at the Royal Court Theatre.
Safe to say the family didn't approve?
Well, I don't know if they approved or not. They just kind of averted their eyes.
He didn't show up.
The real problem I had was that it was about Hitler's last days, and so he was dying, and he was a drug addict, and he was in terrible shape, and of course I didn't present him in a good light. But on the other hand, you have to believe in the character that you're playing, and I was really soundly criticized by Milton Schulman, who's the Jewish critic of the Evening Standard at the time, who accused me of giving a sympathetic performance. I think that kept the family away.
So Hitler was not a popular person in your household?
No, he wasn't. Not in and not in yours, I expect, either.
But didn't you play Hitler in that Highway to Hell movie?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so you have something in common.
We've both played Hitler.
Yeah. It in that movie, the credits are funny. Gilbert Gottfried as Hitler more than the scene.
I see.
The scene wasn't funny at all.
In 220 guests, I believe Jonathan is the first person other than yourself to portray the Fuhrer.
It's a thrill. Now, if we can only get Anthony Hopkins on.
Yeah, right. Or, who's the guy in Downfall? Bruno Gans?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And Mo from the Three
Exactly,
Stooges.
of course.
And all the people and the producers.
And that's right.
And I got to get my most important subject out of the way, too. Where you come from in England, Bath, you were the only Jewish boy.
As far as I know, yes. My father, who was very perceptive about politics, though not about much else, I think, realized in 1936, excuse me,
That's
my
all
phone
right.
just rang and I've got to turn it off.
I love that it's the Morricone.
Yeah. Oh, good, the bad,
It is, yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Sorry about
He's
that.
got a Morricone ringtone.
My father was very perceptive about politics, and in 1936 he realized there was going to be a war with Germany, which most people in Britain were being rather ostrich-like about and pretending that there wasn't. And then this went on till the late 30s, well after the Munich Agreement with Chamberlain and everything. Anyway, he knew there was going to be a war. There were only two people apparently who seemed to know, my father and Mr. Churchill, but nobody took any notice of my father. They didn't take much notice of Mr. Churchill at the time. So he moved his family to Bath, which he thought was a nice small town. He was a doctor in a nice small town where he could practice, and we wouldn't be bombed. When I say we, I wasn't born yet. But in fact, I was born during a bombing raid, and the house was not exactly hit. There was a direct hit for the house next door and a lot of damage in our house. And
so he miscalculated.
So I'm afraid he miscalculated. Yeah. What he didn't know was that the Admiralty had moved to Bath and they were planning D-Day there. So they'd moved out of London too. So anyway, that's why we happen to be in Bath, and it's a very waspy area. And a number of Jewish refugees arrived from Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia slightly before the war and afterwards, but they were all older and didn't seem to have kids. So yes, I think I was probably the only Jewish boy in the town, certainly the only one at my school.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you were not the only Jewish boy in Coney Island.
No.
His dad ran a hardware store.
Yeah?
Yeah, we lived upstairs from the hardware store.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad lived above his, what we call the surgery, what you call an office here. But by the time I was born, they'd moved to a little house in a slightly more posh area of the town.
I get the sense from reading about you, Jonathan, that your parents, did they want a political career for you? They seemed to encourage that, at least when you got to school.
Well,
they paid for you to join the debate society.
Yeah, at Cambridge, yeah. My father was a political junkie.
Uh-huh.
And so I grew up really listening to the news all the time. I mean, the 9 o'clock news on the way to school in the car, and the 1 o'clock news at lunchtime if it was the holidays, and the 6 o'clock news, and then the 9 o'clock news on TV. he was obsessed with it. So I knew a lot about it. And then my uncle, who you mentioned before the broadcast, was a famous Israeli diplomat and politician, and he had been secretary
the
of
legendary Abba Eban.
Yes, and he'd been the secretary of what's called the Union at Cambridge, which isn't a trade union; it's a debating society. It's the debating society, and they wanted me to be equally successful there. But I went along, I joined, and they actually bought me a membership, which I hadn't particularly wanted. And I went along, and I saw all these 20-year-olds. They were all making these puerile and very pompous speeches. And I thought, these people think that they're on the front bench of the Conservative Party in the cabinet, and 20 years later they were, which was horrifying. Disturbing and unchanged.
But you realized that you could make a bigger contribution to society.
I realized that what I had to do was make fun of them.
Right.
So it kind of scared you when you saw, like, this is who are important people.
Yes, this is what they were like 20 years ago, and this is what these are going to be the important people who run the country in 20 years. Gosh, what a horrible thought. And, one of them became leader of the Tory party, and another one was in the cabinet, and they were just as pompous and self-important in government as they were when they were 20 years old at Cambridge.
But they gave you a gift. They inspired you to be funny.
They inspired me with contempt and the desire and the desire to ridicule them on every possible occasion.
It's funny because if you don't experience that, it's just like people in showbiz. I used to think if someone was in show business, they were talented.
You just assumed it
wouldn't be
right.
And if you saw a politician, you'd go, well, they have to be really intelligent people.
Yes, absolutely not. In my experience.
Were you a comedy fan?
I think they're a rarity, I think. Sorry.
Were you a comedy fan as a kid, or was this sort of the turning point?
I watched, there were some great TV comedy shows in England when I was a kid. There were some great comedians who your audience here probably wouldn't know, like Tony Hancock and Tommy Cooper and various other people who were wonderful. And I also watched, every week, the Phil Silvers Show, and I watched I Married Joan with
so
Joan
American
Davis.
shows were coming over on the BBC.
And, Lucy.
I Love Lucy.
I Love Lucy was on.
Yeah.
I didn't see that as often. For some reason, that wasn't on quite as much.
Jack Benny, did you get
Jack
Burns
Benny.
in it?
I never missed Jack Benny.
Okay, great.
Wonderful. I later saw him at the Palladium. But alone among my school friends, when I say school friends, they weren't really friends, school acquaintances.
Uh-huh.
I knew who wrote all these programs. I actually read the credits.
Oh, you're a credit reader.
I saw that Phil Silver's show was written by Neil Simon and Woody Allen, and I remembered their names. And the Court Jester, which I thought was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life.
Oh, the Danny Kaye picture?
The Danny Kaye. Yeah. And that was written by Norman Panama and Melvin Frank. And I remember those names. I didn't know who they were, but I thought, these people are funny. And I thought, how do you do that? How can you actually just be funny on command? And it was a great mystery to me. And I thought, I've got to try and figure that out one day.
So this is where I don't understand. But you went to law school.
I did.
Okay.
Well, my parents didn't want me to be an actor or anything like that. I mean, my son, the doctor, right? And I refused to be a doctor. They say a lawyer is a Jewish boy who can't stand the sight of blood. and I, so I studied law. But then when I left Cambridge, the week I left, I was offered this incredible job as an actor on Broadway. So
with the Cambridge circus.
Well, yes. This was a review that had been done at Cambridge with John Cleese and Graham Chapman and some other people who you might not know here.
Bill Oddie.
You know Bill Oddie? Sure. And Tim Brooke-Taylor. I don't know if you know them. Well, anyway, they were all in it. And I was in the band, and it was taken to the West End of London. It was such a success, got such good reviews at Cambridge, That's a bit like the Second City happened here, or Nichols and May from Chicago. In those days, it seemed that if you were sufficiently funny as a student, you might get into the West End, and that's what happened. I was in the band. And then after 3 months, I had to leave the band to go back to Cambridge because I was a year behind all of those guys.
I see.
And the week I graduated, I got a phone call saying, "Do you want to come to Broadway with Cambridge Circus?" And I said, "Well, they won't allow me to. There's a musicians' union." They said, "No, in the cast." So I thought, sure.
Suddenly you're an actor
Suddenly
on
I
the
was
Broadway
an actor.
stage.
Yeah. I mean, I'd done some acting at university, but suddenly I was an actor.
For you trivia experts out there, who was going to be on my last season of Saturday Night Live as the host was Graham Chapman.
Gilbert was in the replacement cast after the original SNL
we
cast.
Were mercifully fired before.
He was in the replacement cast that replaced Aykroyd and Chevy and Gilder, the original seven.
It was hopeless.
But Chapman was supposed to host, and did he not? He didn't do it.
He didn't do it, or he didn't show up. Or?
He went there. We sort of did some mini rehearsals, trying to pick bits for him to do. And then he was there for a day. Next day, we found out the producer was fired, and in a few days, the rest of us fired.
Showbiz.
I see. But Graham might not have been very good at that anyway, because he was very good at doing his own material, but he wasn't adaptable. He had his own persona, and he just did what he did. And also, he was very drunk most of the time. So.
I loved your description in the book, in Comedy Rules in your book.
It could have only helped.
We want to plug one of Jonathan's books, which I read, is terrific, Comedy Rules. And you were talking about Chapman and Cleese and how they collaborated, how they wrote together. That Cleese would sit there doing all the typing and all the work, and the Chapman would show up, hungover?
Well, John sat at his typewriter in a very businesslike fashion, and he would go very slowly and meticulously, because that's what he's like. And he might spend a lot of time on a comma. And Graham would arrive late, and then he didn't really do anything. He would lie on the floor, stare at the ceiling, and bark. And look at Playboy, because at that time he was trying to pretend that he was. He was straight, and none of us guessed that he wasn't. And I said to John one day, why do you do this when you're doing almost all the work? And he said, because every 2 or 3 days, Graham comes up with an idea or a line that is so funny that it's worth it.
Oh, unbelievable.
Wow.
Worth the trouble.
Yeah.
That's great.
They were very good friends.
You met them at a party, at a cabaret?
Well, that was at Cambridge. We were all in this comedy club called the Footlights Club. And yeah, they did. I was at I was playing in the band, I think, at some party.
The jazz band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was told there was a cabaret. I was new at Cambridge. And I was told there was a cabaret. I thought cabaret meant, topless girls. And, so I was looking forward to it. And then on came these two very tall young men. And they were very funny. And I thought, where do they get these comedians from? And it turned out they were students. One of them was Cleese, who was also a law student, and one was Graham Chapman, who was a medical student and who did, in fact, subsequently become a doctor.
That's right.
So they were both meant to be a lawyer and a doctor.
Well, a lot of us were meant
you got a
we
law
were all
degree.
meant to be other things. I mean, I was meant to be a lawyer. Tim Brooke Taylor, who we mentioned, was meant to be a lawyer. He was a law student. Stephen Frears, the director, the film director.
Yeah.
He has a degree in law.
Was Tony Hendra hanging around too?
Tony Hendra was hanging around. That describes it, really.
Yeah. Okay.
And he wasn't a law student. I don't know what he studied.
But what a talented group.
Were you and all of these people meant to be lawyers and doctors? Were your families really disappointed that you were?
I think so. I think they didn't really quite understand why, And 20 years later, after I'd had quite a lot of success in my career, I did a play that flopped. It was on for one night, I think, and it was killed by the critics. And my mother phoned and said, you can still go back to the law.
At this point, you directed feature films. And,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. That's great. Norman Lear told us a story that he called his mother to tell her that he was one of the first 5 inductees into the Television Hall of Fame, along with Lucille Ball and Milton Berle and William Paley, and he was just in this rarefied company, this rare company. And he called her and he gave her the news, and she said, "Well, if that's what they want to do." It could be a Jewish mother thing.
It could be.
I heard, Mel Brooks said when he was working for Sid Caesar, and Sid Caesar was the #1 show in the world, that his mother was calling him every day saying, "So, you still have the job there?" They don't know? You still have the job?
Well, my mother wasn't like that. She loved the theatre. When she grew up in the East End of London, in Kennington, she was very, they weren't very well off, but she saved up all her pocket money and went to the Old Vic Theatre, which was just down the road. And she told me she saw John Gielgud's Hamlet 26 times.
Oh, wow.
That must have been almost every performance.
Wow.
And she was a fanatical theatre goer. She didn't disapprove. She just thought it's a dog's life.
Sure.
It's the odds are so much against you, and it's so hard to make a living. And why inflict this on yourself? So she wasn't against the notion, and then she was very encouraging.
You should have something to fall back on.
Yeah, she'd have something to fall back on.
Even at that stage.
That's surprising. I've heard that story so many times of people who were like in poverty, but they would save up their pennies for either a movie or live shows.
Yes.
Like it was entertainment was important.
Warms your heart.
Yes. Well, she really loved it, and so I was brought up from the age of about 4 or 5. I was taken to the theatre every few weeks. There was a very good theatre in Bristol, which had a lot of wonderful actors appearing there at one time or another. Peter O'Toole was the most outstanding, but there was most of the great actors in England played there at one time or another. So, and I saw, a whole lot of good stuff. By the time I was grown up, I knew a lot lot about it.
Had you seen Gielgud and Olivier and Ralph Richardson and these people? Did you see them on stage?
Oh,
Some
yes.
of the great British actors?
All of them, yes.
Peter O'Toole as well?
Peter O'Toole, I think, was the greatest of them all.
Imagine that.
The problem was that, of course, he went into films and hardly went back to the theatre from the age of about 30.
No.
But I saw him on stage a lot for 2.5 years at Bristol. Then I saw him at Stratford-on-Avon playing Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew and Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. He was only in his 20s. He was absolutely great.
How about that?
And then in a play in London called The Long and the Short and the Tall, which was a wonderful anti-war play. And then he went into movies and he changed his face. I mean, he used to have a sort of a long pointed, sort of lumpy nose. And I mean, he looked tough.
Mm-hmm.
And they turned him into this pretty person.
Matinee idol.
Yeah. And I mean, I thought he was great in Lawrence of Arabia and some other films, but I don't think he was ever as good as he was on the stage.
How about that?
That's so funny because he was always, very pretty looking.
Not when I first saw him.
Interesting.
And he was a better actor than those other actors, legendary actors.
Better. It's a matter of taste. But I mean, I really loved what he did. He wasn't better than Gielgud. He was different.
Yeah.
He wasn't better than Olivier. I mean, all these people brought something very different to it. Guinness. I mean, I saw all of them. They were wonderful.
What a gift to have been able to see all of them.
Yes.
In their prime.
Yeah. And they were great. But I think what Peter O'Toole had was a sort of versatility, which you got a glimpse of in a film called My Favorite Year.
Which we were talking about.
When you see what a really funny person he was, which you don't see in most of his movies.
Yes.
And of course that was true of Olivier. I mean, Olivier was a great comic actor. I think better at comedy than tragedy.
And I can't think of a lot of comedies on screen. He's funny in Sleuth. But
he didn't do many comedies on screen. He did a lot on stage.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't think of too many comedies on screen that he was in. I think of him playing, the heavy in Marathon Man. Those kind of things. And Wuthering Heights.
Well, his one of his great Shakespeare films, Richard III, he's both malevolent and extremely funny. It's a film that's not shown much anymore, but it's a great performance.
I have never seen it, but now I will. Well, I want to get the chronology of this too, Jonathan. How long had you been in the company before they told you that you were going to New York?
In what company?
In the working with the
I hadn't been.
You weren't in it at all.
Well, I'd been in the band.
In the band.
But we were all in the same club, and I was junior to them. They'd seen me in some funny sketches, I think. I was in the first sketch that Eric Idle ever wrote. We were in the same college at Cambridge, and he said to me one day, "Do you want to try and there was a college drama show coming up." He said, "Do you want to try and do a funny sketch? Do you want to write one with me?" And I said, "No, I can't write. I've never written anything." And he said, "Well, I'll have a go." So he wrote this sketch, and it was quite funny. And so
the Buckingham Palace Guard sketch.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did you know that?
Oh, I know things.
I don't remember it. I just remember that's what it was. And so we did that, and it went very well. And then Eric and I, actually, I didn't really write much with him, but he always writes by himself. And even in the Monty Python group, he always wrote by himself.
Sure.
They split up into.
Didn't you find that sketch years later and give it to him as a gift?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I found it about 25 years later at the bottom of a drawer. And I framed it and sent it to him for his birthday.
That's great. So you, aside from Gilliam, you knew them all for years. Gilliam being the American.
Well, I knew Gilliam.
Oh, you knew Gilliam too?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, he was in London doing Monty Python.
Oh, that's right. Of course.
I meant to ask before, is John Cleese a funny person in real life?
He can be. Like most comedians, he's funny when he's in the mood, when he chooses to be, when he turns it on. He's also extremely serious, which again I think is true of most comedians. But yes, he can be very funny, certainly.
You said in your book that all comedians and funny people are angry.
I think that's true. I think they're not always angry when they get to sort of my age. But yes, I think comedy attacks institutions. It attacks, it ridicules. If art is criticism of life, comedy is criticism of life by ridicule. We set out to make fun of everything. The government, the politics, the army, the church, the whatever. And we do it because we're all angry about something, and I think everybody is angry from their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to be sort of psychological
Not at
about
all.
it, but
No,
I think everyone suffers from some sort of primitive murderous rage as a child, either with their parents or with their siblings, and they can't show it because as a child you have to be good, in quotes. So you repress it, and then as you grow up, you an outlet for anger is comedy.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the ways, and I think what happens is that what you do as a comedy writer or a comedian is, in a way, is that you tell the truth. Joan Rivers said that. Let me see if I can get what she said precisely. She said, I make people laugh just by saying what everybody's thinking. And I think that's true. And I think that the audience, when they watch something funny and they laugh, they're owning up. They're saying that by laughing, they're saying, I did that, or I thought that, or I wish I'd done that if I'd thought of it, or I wish I'd said that. Or sometimes more aggressively, you said that, you've done that.
That's interesting.
I'm contemptuous of you for doing that. And that's why comedy language is all about killing.
Yeah, interesting.
You know, as we all know, comedians, when they talk about their audience doing an act, they say, I killed them. It went well. I slayed them. I knocked them dead. And if it goes badly, they say, I died.
Do you agree with this, Gilbert, this anger notion? That most funny people are...
So you agree with the idea that comics are basically a little damaged?
Oh, I would say very damaged.
Hasn't that been our experience, Gil? Both yours and mine?
Yes, I think so. But I think as life goes on, they sometimes mellow, either through success or therapy or a good relationship or something.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that when you're funny, it's a great outlet for anger, but it's not a cure. No. You're still angry.
And it's a funny, with any creative outlet, it's always a scary thing, like people who will either go to analysis or give up drugs and alcohol. Are they destroying what's their creativity?
I don't think so. Do you? I mean, I've known a number of dry drunks who are still funny.
Yeah.
I don't think psychoanalysis, I think it helps you understand yourself better. But it doesn't...
Success is a greater threat.
Success.
To funny, in my
is
opinion.
Yes, because then you're out there on the tennis court all day or flying around in your private jet, can't be bothered. I mean, what happens with people who are some people who are very successful is they stop bothering. But it doesn't happen to the best people. The best people remain funny and angry one way or another, I think, permanently.
And it's funny to think that, I always think this, going back to old entertainment, like, people don't realize, like, when they watch Charlie Chaplin now or the Marx Brothers, just how rebellious they were.
Very, very. I mean, Chaplin, because he's always got this veneer of sentiment and pathos, because he was always trying to make himself appealing. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like the problem with being angry and showing it. This is why comedy is such a useful outlet for disguising your anger. If you're angry and you show it, you're not funny anymore. And you want to be liked by an audience. All comedians and comedy writers want audience approval. So, I mean, that saying, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there, did it really fall? Well, Henny Youngman's version of that was, if a husband's alone in the forest, is he still wrong?
Great joke. Great joke.
But the problem is you do want to be liked.
Yeah.
So it's a balance that you have to find.
I find that the funniest people, like Chaplin, like Groucho, who was an angry man,
yeah,
that there's a connection there. The comedians that I've always enjoyed over the years, when I've done some digging, I always find that there's a lot of dysfunction.
Oh yeah,
and a lot in terrible childhoods in the case of someone like Chaplin, Groucho's childhood too. But also there's anger. There's a
all of their jokes are angry. I mean, all of the Marx Brothers jokes are angry.
Yeah, Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, these are angry people.
They're angry people.
Yeah,
that's why they're funny.
I agree.
Because they're saying things that other people don't or won't say.
I agree.
Or do.
Tell us about. Go ahead, Gil.
Yeah, I mean, when Groucho was. When he was a member of the Hillcrest Country Club, that was the club that he famously said, don't want to join a club that would have me as a member. Well, he was offered to join another club. I think it was Bel Air, but I'm not sure. And they said, but you can't go in the swimming pool. This because he was Jewish, right? He said, you can't go to the swimming pool. And he said, well, my daughter's only half Jewish. Can she wade in up to her knees? I mean, very funny, but it's an angry joke.
I mean, it's a really
angry joke.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Just tell Gilbert this one thing that I know he'll love. The Sullivan show that you did.
Yeah.
You were 21.
Yeah.
You come to New York. The show did not last on Broadway.
No.
It's a couple of... by the way, the Times review is still online. I was reading it today. Very interesting.
The Times Review was the only one that wasn't good enough, but the Times was the only paper that really counted. We got 5 great reviews out of 6.
1964.
But we were totally unknown. I mean,
right.
Totally unknown.
It's fascinating now to see it in this context. There are clips from the sketches online, too, on YouTube.
I know, that must be terribly embarrassing.
Well, it's just audio.
Oh, right.
But it's English for beginners.
Right.
It's the Cleese, the courtroom sketch. And it's fascinating.
Oh, yeah, that was really funny.
Yeah, fascinating.
Some
to
of those
listen
sketches
to.
were really funny.
But the night that you did Sullivan was in some way a famous Sullivan night.
It was. It was the night that he had the famous fight with Jackie Mason.
How about that, Gil?
Wow.
Jonathan was there.
That was the alleged finger.
Yes. Well, I saw it. I mean, I was right there. I'd just been on. And, what happened was at the dress rehearsal, the Animals were on, the rock group. And it was only a few weeks after the Beatles, or maybe a few months, I don't know, after the Beatles were on. And Ed Sullivan always tried to put a British rock group on. And that meant that the audience was full of screaming teenage girls, aged about 14 or 15. And there was a dress rehearsal with an audience in the afternoon, and Jackie Mason had top billing. And so he went on last, and he was given, whatever it was, 10 or 12 minutes. But he tried, none of his jokes worked with this audience. So he just kept trying and kept going on, and he went on, and finally he stopped. And Sullivan and the producers said to him, well, you can't, you've got to keep the time tonight. And there were a lot of big people on the show. Van Johnson was on the show. He was doing a show at the Copacabana, I think it was, and he sang Girl from Ipanema.
Van Johnson.
Oh, jeez.
But he didn't know the lyrics. and there's a line in it, Girl from Ipanema, so fair and gentle. And the prop man, who was obviously Jewish, had written so fair and Gentile, and he sang it.
That's funny.
And so he was demoted, as it were. He was told he couldn't, because this was a big night. LBJ was going to address the nation from 8:30 to 8:45. So there was a crucial 15-minute period on the East Coast when nobody would see the show. And everyone wanted to avoid that 15 minutes. And of course, we were put right in the middle of that 15 minutes because we were unknown. But we were funny at the dress rehearsal, or moderately so. So we were given a spot just before LBJ. Van Johnson was told he was going to be on in the middle of LBJ's speech, so he walked out. He put on his fedora and left, and his agent hurried after him saying, you can't behave like this to Ed Sullivan. So he came back, and he was given, he was told, I'll introduce you at 8:12, but you're going to sing at 8:40. And Joan Sutherland was on, the great opera singer.
Sure.
She was doing the mad scene from Lucia d'Amour, and which it lasts 18 minutes, but they'd cut her down to 4 minutes. And how did I get onto
the Sullivan thing you were watching? You were watching Jackie Mason.
Sorry,
yeah,
Jackie Mason. I'm sorry if I'm going on.
No,
too
it's
long.
all right. It's interesting.
So Jackie Mason went on that night, and his material just wasn't working. And what happened was, because he was sort of partially ad lib, and he started a joke, and he was thrown because he got a 2-finger sign from the stage manager. So it threw him, and he started the gag all over again. He got to the same point, and he got a 1-finger sign, whereupon he said to the stage manager, add a finger to you. But he didn't make an obscene gesture. If he did, it wasn't on screen. I couldn't see. They cut him off because that was considered an obscene remark. And then there was this tremendous fight afterwards, which I think I'd made worse because Ed Sullivan had told me to tap him lightly on the head with my tambourine when I went off at the end of the song I was doing. But I was a bit nervous, so I really bashed him. And he looked a bit cross-eyed for a second and wobbled. And so I think maybe he was in a bad temper anyway. But then he was in a terrible rage with Jackie Mason. And they shouted and screamed at each other, and a torrent of filthy language from Ed Sullivan, who was this sort of super Catholic, Mr. Nice Guy, language you wouldn't credit. And then, although I didn't see it, I gather he threw Jackie Mason down a flight of stairs.
Wow.
Well, the next day they sued each other, and as you know. And,
yes.
And Jackie Mason didn't work on television for 15 years.
This story's been told on this show several times, but never by an eyewitness.
Oh, well,
We've talked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was just a nervous response when he got a 1 minute finger sign from
How about that, Gil?
Boy. Yeah, because I remember I've seen it, and he doesn't give the finger. He's just going,
You can't see it.
He said a finger for you and a finger for you. And
Yeah, it
this
wasn't.
one's giving me this finger, this one's giving me that finger.
Yeah, it wasn't. So is that what he said? I don't remember.
Something
But it
like
was
that.
something like that. And anyway, but Sullivan went nuts.
Yeah. And he didn't work for a long time.
I think it was about 15 years on television.
Yeah. How about that? That was such the power of Ed Sullivan.
Yes.
Yeah. So you went back. This was this was the big New York debut in the States.
Yes.
You went back to the UK and what? Decided
Well, they
you were
all
gonna...
wanted to be comedians.
I see.
And I didn't. I wanted to be an actor. I had a very inflated idea of what I wanted to do with my life. I thought I was going to be the next Alec Guinness or something. So I got a job and I was lucky. I immediately got work in regional theatres. And yes, so I went back and I became an actor. And then
And then you started acting and writing for television.
no, well, that was much later.
Oh, it was much later.
Well, I was 2 or 3 years later, I was in Fiddler on the Roof.
Right. Original London cast?
Original London cast with Jerome Robbins directing me. That was a tough experience because, he was a genius, but he wasn't really a nice guy.
Jerome Robbins.
Yeah. He may have been nice to some people, but anyway, I was really bad during the previews because he hadn't been there and I'd been directed by an assistant who kept telling me to play it. They kept showing me what Austin Pendleton did in the original New York production.
I see.
I subsequently became great friends with
Yeah.
Austin. He plays the stuttering lawyer in My Cousin Vinny, but I'm nothing like him as an actor. So I tried to do what I was told. Anyway, Robbins arrived, and in time for the first preview, and I was terrible. And the first rehearsal next morning, predictably, was 10 o'clock for me, and all my scenes. And so he said, "Why are you doing that?" And we started, and I did so. He said, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "I've been told to." He said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Well, all right, let's start again. Let's do it differently." So he directed me very well. But at one point, he wasn't happy with the fact I was being too self-effacing. And he said, "Look, you want a married Seitel." He always had a really big smile on his face when he was going to be truly unpleasant. He smiled from ear to ear. He grinned at me and he said, you want a married Seitel. She wants to marry you. Look at her. Rosemary, she's a beautiful girl. She wants to marry you. So somehow we have to find some way to turn you into an attractive human being.
And you're a kid at this point.
I was 23.
23. The great Jerome Robbins putting you through your paces.
Yeah.
And then some.
Well, then I got better after that, and he stopped smiling at me, which was a good sign. Unlike with most people.
Was it Robbins who worked with Zero years later?
Yes.
And Jack Guilford
No,
told you?
he worked with Zero much earlier. What happened was,
okay.
Zero had been asked to name names to the House
Right.
American Activities Committee, as you probably know, and
Right.
refused.
Yes, we had Josh here, his son.
Right. So, and then Robbins was asked to name names, and he did. He had also been, I suppose, a communist or whatever was passed for a communist in those days. He was asked to name names, so Zero and Robbins did not speak. Well, they were doing a funny thing happened on the way to the forum out of town, and it wasn't working. And Hal Prince, the producer, said, "The only person that I know who can fix this and make it work is Jerry Robbins. Do you mind if I get him in to work on the show and redirect it?" And it was Jack Guilford that told me this story.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack Guilford said, he was so proud of this. He said, Zero said, I won't have dinner with him, but I will work with him. We on the left have no blacklist.
That's powerful.
So they did work together, and of course it was a huge hit. And then they worked together on Fiddler, not very warmly, apparently. I didn't do it with Zero. I did it in London with Topple.
Oh,
And,
interesting. Did Zero have some crack about when he entered the room and he shook Robin's hand for the first time?
Yes. Well, when it was Jack Guilford that told me this story, he was in the Castor Forum, and he said they never referred to this whole history between them of Robin's naming names to the House Un-American Activities Committee, except one time when Robbins arrived for his first day of rehearsal, and Zero said, "Hello, Liz Lips."
I love that. Mostel struck me as the kind of guy that could hold a grudge.
Apparently.
Yeah.
I mean, not unreasonably.
Not unreasonably in this case. No, not at all.
And so both of them were blacklisted, both Zero and Jack
Guilford too.
Jack Guilford was too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it was a tragic time.
Oh, God.
And I met a lot of these guys in London because I knew a writer who was the first president of the Screenwriters Guild called Donald Ogden Stewart. He won the Oscar for Philadelphia Story.
Terrific writer.
Terrific writer.
Holiday,
yes. And
Life with Father.
Yes. Lots of great movies. And he was asked to name names in 1954 when he had a play on the road in New Haven coming into Broadway, and he refused and just got up and left America and moved to London and lived in Hampstead but never worked again, which made him very angry, which he covered with a lot of good jokes. But at his house, and I knew him, I was still 22, 23, and he was in his 70s. And at his house, every Sunday afternoon, he and his wife, Ella Winter, would have expatriate Americans over for tea. So I met Ring Lardner and Waldo Salt and Chaplin once.
Wow.
And all kinds of people there. And one of them said, I can't remember which one, said, I think it was Dalton Trumbo, said, talking about this whole Un-American Activities thing, we were all victims. He was talking about the people who named names and the people who didn't. He took a very wide view of it. And so it was interesting. So I knew a whole lot about those people and their history. So when I came to write the screenplay of Clue, and I had to set it in a period of American history, a country house thriller,
right?
Parody of a country house thriller like Agatha Christie had to be period. So I set it in the 50s because I knew all about that period of American history from all of these writers that I'd met when I was young.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, you also had to make the story work. So you were looking for a way to give them aliases.
I had to find a story, yeah.
Right,
but I chose that period because it was the period of American history I actually knew something about because I'd met, all of these writers and Jack Guilford and everybody. I knew them all.
How did you find Chaplin to be before we talk about Clue?
Well, he was just very old and pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Paul Newman said of that era, he said, it's very easy now to say what you would have done then.
Well, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. And when all those people opposed Elia Kazan getting that honorary Oscar, it was interesting that some people of notably liberal politics like Warren Beatty supported him.
He'd worked with him.
It worked with him,
yeah.
And he thought he was a great director. And, and nobody knows what the pressures were. Kazan's autobiography is very interesting because he says he never named anybody who they didn't know the names of already. He just gave them names that they knew. So it didn't make any difference. But for some reason, he was picked out as the ultimate bad guy.
I got a question about Clue. Jonathan from...
I was just going to tell you another thing. When I was talking to Orson Welles about all this.
Yeah, tell us about that.
I was acting for Orson Welles. And I asked him about that whole period. And I said, where were you in all that? And he said, well, I was never a communist like all those guys. I was a liberal. And I said, would you refuse to talk to Kazan or any of those people? And he said, no, I think it's childish not to say good morning to people.
Interesting.
Which I thought was rather wise.
Yeah, yeah. Wells was good to you, by the way.
Very good to me. I had the best time.
That's nice. You worked with him for about 3 months on a project that didn't materialize?
Well, it never was finished.
I see.
I mean, there were lots of dailies. It was one of his 11 uncompleted films.
Were there 11?
I think there's 11.
Yeah, he was constantly starting movies and either running out of money.
It wasn't The Other Side of the Wind. It wasn't the...
It wasn't The Other Side of the Wind, though he was doing bits of that on the side.
We had Bogdanovich here.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah.
He was doing bits of that on the side. This was called Orson's Bag.
Orson's Bag.
And it was a CBS TV special. And he did some... I was hired because he wanted to do some sketches. It was in the mid-'60s. He wanted to do a sketch of swinging London. And I was to be a tailor, and Charles Gray. You know Charles Gray? He was the bad guy in Goldfinger.
Yeah, right.
And we were to be tailors, and Orson was to be an American customer in Savile Row in the swinging 60s. And then, there were various other sketches. There was a scene in a London club when I was a 100-year-old butler. I was 25. And he played, there were 3 elderly Brits, and he played all of them apparently, though I never saw his performance in that. And then there was a bit of The Merchant of Venice, all of Shylock scenes. So, but yes, he ran out of money because CBS, he spent all of CBS's money and he hadn't anywhere near finished it. And then, like with all his other projects, he hustled around trying to make some money from his commercials.
Oh,
so, from Sherry and Birdseye.
Oh, yeah.
Birdseye Peas
Oh, sure.
is a classic.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that's a classic.
It's a classic.
Yeah, well, he told me how that happened, how that came about, why he was so rude to them. They made him audition. And they said, it was for a voiceover. And they said, surely to God, somebody in that little agency of yours knows what I sound like.
About that.
And,
I've never heard
they
this.
said, well, you've got to audition. So he auditioned for them. And, of course, he got the job. And then they said, will you come to our studio on Water Street? He said, no, I'm in Europe filming. You'll have to come to me. So he said, so I made them bring their little tape recorder to the Georges V Hotel in Paris. We're due to meet on 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. And I checked out at 10 and went to Venice. So they arrived and I wasn't there. So they found out where I was and they followed me to Venice. And just before they got there, I checked out and went to Vienna. Said I made them chase me around Europe for 10 days with their shitty little tape recorder.
Yeah, I remember. That's the one where he says,
That's great.
show me how to emphasize in July, and I'll go down on you.
It's wonderful.
Right.
It's wonderful.
Right.
You've heard, of course. You've
I've
heard
got
those
it.
out. Oh, you've got it. It's
Yes.
a wonderful,
Yeah.
a wonderful
And
artifact.
then there's that drunken Paul Maison.
There's the other one where he's had a
commercial.
couple of sips of that's on YouTube. He's had a couple of
I haven't
drinks.
seen that.
I'll send it
He's
to you.
got a high-pitched
He's had
voice.
a
all
couple of
a sudden.
drinks, and by the 7th or 8th take, he's in his cups.
And I got to ask you, I mean,
The
this
thing about
line-
him is he was very funny. People don't
I'm sure
know
he
that
was.
about him, but in real life, he was extremely funny.
Now, I can't let you get away without this one. You claim there's no such a thing as bad taste when it comes to comedy.
Yes. You want me to elaborate?
Oh,
on
yes.
Have you seen Gilbert's act, by the way?
I've heard about it.
Okay.
Well, I think all comedy, by definition, is in bad taste because it's going to offend somebody. If it doesn't offend anybody, it's probably not doing its job. So the question is, So since I think all comedy is arguably in bad taste, there's no such thing as good taste, I think, in comedy. So the question is a different question. Is it funny or isn't it funny? If it's funny, it's not in bad taste. If it makes people laugh, it's not in bad taste. If it doesn't make people laugh, then it is in bad taste, usually. Carl Reiner had the best definition of funny that I ever heard. He said, if you put it up on the screen in front of an audience of 400 people and they laugh, it's funny. If you put it up on the screen and they don't laugh, it's not funny. And I think that's right. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody finds everything funny. Everyone's taste is different. So, for instance, if I go and see a show and I don't think it's funny, but the rest of the audience does, if the rest of the audience is laughing, I don't come out of there and say, it wasn't funny. I come out and say, I didn't find it funny, which is slightly different.
It's interesting.
But I think all comedy, by definition, is what we talked about before. It's going to upset or going to offend or going to criticize somebody, and it always runs the risk of being in bad taste.
Because its job is to tear things down.
Its job is to tear things down.
Yeah.
Sometimes you go too far, and you go into not funny.
Gilbert wouldn't know. Gil, did you ever go too far?
No. Never got in trouble for that.
I do have one question about Clue, since we're moving along quickly. This is actually from a listener, Johnny Caps. Clue was not initially a success, and yet it's become a classic, especially among young people who discover it year after year. What does Jonathan think young audiences see in Clue that older audiences didn't?
Well, I don't think it's quite that simple. I think older audiences didn't see it at all.
Multiple endings didn't help?
Well, we opened with these multiple endings, which all the producers, it was my first film, so I didn't know any better. All the producers said it would be a great idea because, partly because Clue the game could work out in lots of different ways, so they thought multiple endings was a great idea. They asked me to write it with multiple endings. I wasn't going to direct it at that point. So I said yes, and I wrote 4. And it was very difficult to write because you have to, trying to write a suspense or a thriller, even if it's a parody of that, where logically all 4 explanations at the end make sense.
Right.
It's quite difficult to engineer because people can go back and look at the film and say, well, that didn't make sense. So they've all got to make sense. Well, I realized during the making of the film, or rather during the editing of the film, that if we didn't put them all together, no one would see that was ingenious, which was really the point of it. They thought that if we have 3 or 4 different endings out there in different movie theaters, people will go 3 or 4 times. Well, no. What happened was they thought, I don't know which to go to, so they didn't go. Or maybe they thought, if these filmmakers don't know how to end the film, why should I go and see it? So anyway, from whatever reason, they didn't go. And it didn't get very good reviews. So most people didn't see it. It did no business. So then what happened was, I think, that people, with the dearth of what to show on afternoon television over the years, TV companies showed it in the middle of the afternoon. And children watched it. And they thought it was absolutely great. And they kept watching it. And as they grew up, they still thought it was great. Mm-hmm. And because the jokes are not really kids' jokes, you can appreciate it as a kid, but there are lots of grown-up jokes. So what happened was a whole generation of people watched the film by default, as it were, on television, and then kept watching it, and it became a lot of people's big favorite.
It's got a big following.
It's got a huge following.
Yeah.
I'm as surprised as the next man.
Right.
Anybody else want a whiskey?
Yeah.
All right, look, pay attention, everybody. Wadsworth, am I right in thinking there is nobody else in this house?
No.
Then there is someone else in this house.
No, sorry. I said no, meaning yes.
No meaning yes? Look, I want a straight answer. Is there someone else or isn't there? Yes or no?
No.
No, there is or no, there isn't?
Yes.
Please! Don't you think we should get that man out of the house before he finds out what's been going on here?
Yeah.
How can we throw him outside in this weather?
If we let him stay in the house, he may get suspicious.
If we throw him out, he may get even more suspicious. If I were him, I'd be suspicious already.
Oh, who cares? That guy doesn't matter. Let him stay locked up for another half an hour.
The police will be here by then, and there are 2 dead bodies in the study.
Shh. Well, there is still some confusion as to whether or not there's anybody else in this house.
I told you there isn't.
There isn't any confusion, or there isn't anybody else?
Either. Or both.
Just give me a clear answer.
Certainly. What was the question?
Is there anybody else in the house?
No!
Watch it the other night, and I tell you, that cast, I mean, in some ways, it's a once-in-a-lifetime cast to have Martin Mull and McKean and your friend Tim Curry.
Yes.
And Madeline, of course.
Madeline was so wonderful. She was so great. But I didn't know it was a once-in-a-lifetime cast. I'd come over from England. I didn't know who any of them were except Madeline Kahn, who I'd seen in Mel Brooks's films.
And Curry, you had history with.
And Curry,
Right.
Tim Curry I'd been to school with.
Right.
But for the rest, I didn't know them. And they were just people who their agents suggested, and they read the script and wanted to be in it, and they came in for meetings the way people do. And I thought these people would be good. I didn't know they were iconic characters, or maybe they weren't in those days. I don't know. But it turned out that they were good choices.
It's fun. It's fun. I watched it again the other night.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and it's nice. Isn't it nice and gratifying to see a film grow an audience over the years?
It's extraordinary.
Something like It's a Wonderful Life did not do very well upon initial release, and then gained a reputation.
It happens quite often, which is my main reason for preferring to do films and plays.
Mm-hmm.
Because if a play doesn't work, it's dead. It's over. That's it. It's gone forever.
Yeah.
If a film doesn't work the first time out, that just could mean that the critics, who are, after all, that's just a few people's opinions, and they're as often wrong as right. They didn't like it. They put people off. People didn't go. But it's still there. And over the years, people do get a chance to see it again sometimes.
And you talked about in England you saw Sergeant Bilko with Phil Silvers, and you were a fan.
Yes.
And then years later, you would make Sergeant Bilko into a film.
Yes.
And talk about
Jonathan is staring. I'm telling our listeners the look on Jonathan's face.
Yeah, he's not helping me.
He's staring at Gilbert. You're really going to bring up Sergeant Bilko.
Well, I don't think Sergeant Bilko, the movie, a lot of people liked it, but I don't think it works. I'm not happy with it. And for a whole variety of reasons. Phil Silvers was so great. And although Steve Martin's an absolutely brilliant comedian, I'm not sure that really it was his part. He wanted to do it completely differently and bring his own qualities to it, which he did, and he had some very funny scenes in it. I was still imagining Phil Silvers, so I don't think we were quite together on it. We never got the script to work before we started shooting, so every Saturday, we shot Monday to Friday, every Saturday Steve and I would meet and write some new stuff for the following week, which actually is some of the best stuff in the movie, I think. But the big mistake with it was that it was a really bad marketing idea. When the Phil Silvers show was on, when Sergeant Bilko was first on, it was right after the Korean War. It was not long after World War II. Nearly every man in America had been in the army or in the military in some form, and they understood it and they knew it and they got all the jokes and it all meant something to them. And, you have to do movies about things that people understand, that are interesting to them. When we made Sergeant Bilko, it was 20-something or 30 years after the Vietnam War. There was no more draft. Maybe 300,000 people in the whole of America were serving in the military. It was a foreign country to them.
The context had changed.
The context had changed, and it's recognition that makes people laugh. And there wasn't any recognition about anything military from most of the audience.
Still good performances.
Very good performances. Yeah. Steve is very funny.
Phil Hartman's funny.
Phil Hartman's wonderful. Dan Aykroyd's always good.
Yeah.
I mean, there were good performances and some very funny scenes. But I never thought we got the script quite right.
Hartman's funny in your other picture, too, in Greedy.
Phil was great.
Yeah.
He was one of the funniest people I've ever worked with.
What a loss.
What a loss.
Let's talk quickly about a film that does work as we wind down.
Well, some people think Bilko works. I mean, I'm just telling you what.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I think.
in your opinion, my cousin Vinny.
Yeah. People love that one.
Which and interesting too, as I was telling Gilbert, as a lawyer, you're proud of the fact that it works from a legal perspective as well. It's legally accurate.
It is legally accurate, and it's very, it's very nice that the most enthusiastic people about the film are trial lawyers and judges. I mean, I've been to talk at a couple of conventions of federal judges, and I get people. Law schools apparently use it for teaching evidence and for teaching about how to do things in court, which is really very nice. Now, I don't take all the credit for that. Dale Lorna wrote the script, and he'd researched it very well. I did add some stuff, obviously, but the main thing I'm pleased with is not. Although I love the fact that it's legally accurate. I'm really pleased with it. It breaks a lot of Hollywood rules. The biggest rule is there's no bad guy.
Yeah.
Most people think that Hollywood comedies, there's always a bad guy. And I get sort of bored when the bad guy comes on because I think, I see how this works. Vinny doesn't have a bad guy.
No, the closest thing you've got is Lane Smith's prosecutor.
Well, yeah, but he's not a bad guy.
Just doing his job.
Perfect. He's just doing his job.
Right.
He's happy to share. He's not withholding evidence.
Yeah.
He's the judge is strict and stern, but he's fair. The problem is that Vinny and the two boys are up against the system, and I love the fact that it doesn't have the traditional bad guy in the movie. I think it's not necessary.
It's so funny. So many movies I watch where whatever kind of line of work, and I'm always going, something rings so false.
Yeah.
And even when they're dealing with show business, which they should know,
Yes.
it's something so false about it in movies.
Very often. And with Vinny, I took great pains to get everything legally correct. And as I said, Dale Lorna had done a lot, but I was, after all, running it. But it's also an example of how to make an angry film attractive to people. I mean, actually, what that film was about is capital punishment. Actually saying...
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, these two boys would have been fried if they didn't have a peculiarly belligerent, aggressive lawyer, Vinny. And, for me, one of the most important things about the film is it says, you can't execute people. There's no going back on that.
It's a comedy that's about something.
I think all good comedies are about something.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the problem with Sergeant Bilko. It's not really about anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot of funny scenes.
I've heard you say that about when you tackle a project. For you, it's got to be.
It's got to be about something.
Yeah. This was.
Yeah.
And Frank
go on.
Frank and I were talking earlier and laughing about this, is where that scene, and it's like in all the commercials, and everyone remembers.
Oh, it's iconic.
Which scene?
Two Utes.
Yeah.
Oh,
two Utes.
Well, that was real dialogue between Joe Pesci and me.
You were smart enough to use it.
What happened was we were sitting in the Mayflower Hotel in New York. And we were sort of working on the script a bit, and he said to me, "There's these two Utes," and I said, "What?" And he said, "Two Utes," and I said, "What's a Ute?" What? What? And he said, "Two youths," and I thought that's got to go in, so
Great.
I just put it in.
Wonderful.
Wow. And that's like the most famous part of that movie.
What a gift.
Everyone remembers.
What was we talk about?
For me, the funniest scene is Austin Pendleton as the stuttering lawyer, which I was crying with laughter behind the camera.
Oh, he was terrific.
I was praying that he wouldn't, that I wouldn't put him off, and that he wouldn't hear me, and that the sound wouldn't pick up my desperate attempts to muffle my laughter.
So funny. Even in Greedy, you give him that little scene where he's the hotel clerk. When Michael J. Fox is checking in, and he steals that scene.
He does.
2 minutes.
He's wonderful.
We love him. We'd love to have him here.
They didn't want Marisa Tomei.
No. Well, she wasn't a star. They thought they needed a star. They offered it to lots of stars, mostly against my wishes and without telling me, because that's what studios do. Fortunately, they all said no. And then I started holding auditions as screen tests. Well, I remember Marissa Tomei came in. She hadn't been suggested. I went over to see a film, not a very good film, actually. It was being made by John Landis called Oscar, and she had a tiny part in it. And I thought, and I watched one scene, and I thought, she's funny. And so I said to John, who is that? He said, she's called Marissa Tomei. I said, can I see some footage of her? And he said, yes. So we went over to the cutting room, and I saw some footage. I went back, and I said to my casting director, can we see Marissa Tomei for this, for Mona Lisa Vito? He said, well, she's not right for it. I said, why not? He said, well, William Morris has suggested everybody they've got on their list, and they haven't suggested her, so she's not right. So I don't have that kind of touching faith in agents. So so I said, let's get her in. So she came in and did a wonderful reading, and then we had to do a screen test. Fox insisted that we do a screen test of our 3 top contenders. So I did a screen test of the 3 women, and Marissa was undoubtedly the best and completely right for the part. And I thought, I know there's going to be trouble over this. They don't know who she is. So I took the tape over to Joe Pesci's caravan where he was filming something else, and said, what do you think of these 3? And he said, well, it's got to be that one. What's her name? I said, Marissa. He said, it's got to be her. So I sent the tape over to Fox, and they selected a different woman.
Unbelievable.
So then I went to a very long meeting, a very long, protracted argument in which I said, it's got to be Marissa Tomei. She's the one. She's right for it. She sounds like she's from Brooklyn. She looks Italian. She's the real thing. And they said, no, we want so-and-so, their favorite. So finally, I produced my trump card, and I said, well, Joe Pesci says it's got to be Marissa Tomei. And I could see them thinking, oh, God, we don't want to have a fight with Joe Pesci. So they said, oh, all right, well, it's your movie. You do what you want.
Wow.
And
talk about being vindicated.
Yeah.
Bit of luck, that, yeah.
What about these pants I got on? You think they're okay? Oh!
Imagine you're a deer. You're prancing along, you get thirsty, you spot a little brook, you put your little deer lips down to the cool, clear water. Bam! A fucking bullet rips off part of your head. Your brains are laying on the ground in little bloody pieces. Now I ask you, would you give a fuck what kind of pants the son of a bitch who shot you was wearing?
And then that started the rumor,
Oh, that ridiculous rumor
famous
that
Hollywood
she didn't really
rumor
win.
that she wasn't the best actress, but Jack Palance was drunk that night.
Yeah.
And read the wrong name.
I know. I saw a lot of people said that. There's no reason for saying it.
No.
And she was absolutely great. But she was the complete outsider. You know, all the others were much more famous. All of them, I think, except one, were American. Judy Davis was nominated. I think she's a very famous Australian actress at the time. And I thought Marissa would win all the time because, well, for a very simple reason. It opened in March. By the time it got round to the Oscars the following February or whenever it was, everyone I ever spoke to said, who's that wonderful woman?
And everyone had seen it by then.
Everyone had seen it. Yeah. Everyone said, who is that girl? So I thought, she's got a good chance.
Comedy rules, in your book, you're talking about how often comedies are disrespected by the Oscars. So it's certainly nice to see somebody winning for a comedic performance.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
go on. In getting back to that subject of movies that bomb and then do well, I mean, Fort Fairlane was one of those, bombed horribly and picked up a tremendous cult following. And I think had it not bombed, they were considering Andrew Dice Clay to be the lawyer as to play Vinny.
Had you heard that, or is that a rumor?
That's what I heard.
I'd heard that, but when I was offered it, Joe Pesci was attached.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So there you go.
So I don't know if that was true or not. I I don't think so. Because it was originally going to be done with Danny DeVito. And Danny DeVito was going to star in it and direct it. And then for some point during the development, he went off it, as people do. And CAA immediately produced their other small Italian.
Love it. Fantastic. Tell us quickly about Fred Gwynne, something about working with
Fred. Was
great
just
Fred Gwynne.
great. I loved Fred. He was so intelligent and so helpful. He was a wonderful man. He was really funny. You know, he was also a very good artist. He wrote children's books and he illustrated them
Harvard
himself.
educated as well.
Yeah. And he was just a delight. And I wanted him to be in my next film, The Distinguished Gentleman. He said, "Are you shooting in Baltimore?" He lived in Baltimore.
Uh-huh.
I said, "No, we shot some of The Distinguished Gentleman in Baltimore for government buildings, but no, we're shooting in Georgia." He said, "No."
What a shame. He and Pesci was such a wonderful Mutt and Jeff team. I could have watched 10 more movies with just the two of them.
They were
going face to
great.
face.
Yes.
Yeah. And Distinguished Gentlemen.
Yes, they
by
had
the
the same sort of relationship off screen
Did
as they
they?
had on screen. Yes.
Yeah. I want to recommend Distinguished Gentlemen,
It's
too,
funny because Fred Gwynne,
to our listeners.
for years, I think he was like really embarrassed by being Herman Munster, and yet he lives on, and they love him.
And it was
And
funny
Car
because
54.
on the opening day, his first shot, I think he thought that's what I wanted because that's what everyone wanted from him. And he did his first few lines as the judge like Herman Munster, and I was absolutely horrified. And so I called a coffee break, sent everyone off the set, and sat down with Fred and said, "Fred, that's not what's happening here." And he said, "Oh, I thought that's what you wanted." And I said, "No, definitely not. I want you to, act it."
He had range.
Oh,
I mean, you look at
it
Cotton
wasn't a
Club.
problem for him. He just assumed.
Yeah.
He was so tired of Herman Munster, but
I'm
he just
sure.
assumed that's what everybody hired him for.
Poor man. And great
Yeah.
in the role. I must say, the way you cast your films, and I was watching Distinguished Gentlemen this week, too, and that cast, too, and Joe Don Baker, and Garner, and Cheryl Lee Ralph.
James Garner was such a gentleman. He was quite elderly, and he was. Took pains to not ask him to the set, not call him in the morning if we weren't going to use him till later in the day, because it's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
So we called him at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then the weather changed, and it was clear we couldn't use him till noon or so. So I went to his trailer to apologize, and he wasn't there. So I found him having coffee on the set with the electricians. And I said, "I'm really sorry we're not going to get to you until later in the day. I'm sorry we called you so early." He said, "That's fine. I act for fun. I get paid for waiting."
How about that? That's great. That's great. Another very well-cast movie.
Thank you.
By the way, and another movie of yours that's about something. That's
Yes.
about lobbyists, and that's
Absolutely.
about campaign finance reform. And
Yes,
it's got
it's
there's
all
ideas
come
there.
true. It's all come true.
Yeah.
Eddie Murphy was great in that film.
Gilbert's old friend.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. They were on SNL together.
I loved working with Eddie.
Oh, yeah, and we worked together in Beverly Hills Cop 2.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also a shout out to the late great Lane Smith, since we're talking about both of those movies,
Yeah.
Vinny and Distinguished Gentlemen. Let's ask you quick. I also want to recommend to our listeners Greedy, which is a lot of fun.
and
you're in it.
I'm very proud of Greedy. That was another one that didn't do well at the box office when it opened.
You should
because,
be.
Well, Michael Fox had done his three previous films had flopped. So the studio decided to try and disguise the fact that he was in it. so his name was very small on the one sheet, and they didn't really, and he was very, very good in
The
it.
cast is great. It opens with a Durante tribute.
Yeah, the cast is great.
Yeah, Hartman.
Michael was extraordinary. I didn't know at the time he'd already been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he kept it from me, which made it very hard some days because he found some moves that would be relatively simple for a 32-year-old actor. He found inexplicably hard. I couldn't understand why.
So he was having trouble physically.
Oh, yes.
That's a shame.
But I didn't know that. He disguised it very, very well.
The scene where he and Kirk Douglas reenact the Durante dance from his childhood on the stairwell is wonderful.
That took a lot of takes because
it's
he
beautiful.
couldn't get it right, although it was not very difficult. And I couldn't understand why he couldn't until afterwards when he told me he had Parkinson's. He was extraordinarily brave and, such a true professional.
Nice to see you in that film, by the way, and kind of the old Eric Bloor role.
Yes, that was it. The Eric. I thought it was the Eric Bloor role. I wouldn't have cast myself, but Lowell Gantz and Babaloo Mandel heard me read the part in auditions for other actors, and they said, "Why don't you play it?" I thought, "Okay, if they want me to." They were the writers. And I thought, they want me to, sure. I wouldn't have suggested it.
And how was Kirk Douglas to work?
Oh, he was great.
In his 70s then.
He was about 75, I think.
Yeah.
And
good comic performance.
And he was wonderful. These old school actors are different from young actors. His first take was always perfect. And he would do 2 or 3 takes, and after that he kind of got a bit bored because he'd done it. He was used to delivering right away. Younger actors, other actors in the scenes, would take several takes to get it right, by which time Kirk was kind of had lost interest.
I imagine. Old school.
But he was great and very, very funny. I mean, I'd never seen him being funny in a movie, but in real life, he was a really funny man, full of great stories about Hollywood in the past.
I'll bet. I have to recommend that to our listeners too, to watch Greedy. A lot of people have seen Clue, but
I'm very pleased with it.
It's Greedy. Fun, and it's got a nice Eric von Stroheim in joke in the characters' names.
Yes.
McTeague.
And a great cast.
Great cast.
Supporting cast.
And Ed Begley was here.
Ed Begley, he was
adore
terrific.
Him.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He's so good.
Yeah. And let's plug the book. Let's plug Samaritans, your new novel.
Okay.
Which is about, because you're a political guy, and it's about the healthcare system or the collapse of the healthcare system.
Yes. Well, of course, it's a funny book, I think. In fact, I know it's funny, but it's also scary. I decided to write a book about a hospital in Washington, D.C. that's beset by rising costs and poor management, like most hospitals. And they decide to hire the CEO of the head of the hotel operations side of a Vegas casino to be the new CEO of the hospital, because he understands about beds occupied, check in and check out, dinners served, and has absolutely no interest in healthcare. But he really understands how to turn a building into a profitable institution, and that's what he does in the course of the book. And what was so strange was I was halfway through writing it when I read that Gary Loveman, who was at that time CEO of Caesar's Palace that was going bankrupt, was hired to be head of Aetna's healthcare division.
Wow. Life imitating art?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely extraordinary. So, and the book is about how the business school model doesn't work for everything, including healthcare. That it's not everything can be about profit and loss. Some things have to be about actually caring for human beings. It's not a view that's fashionable in Washington right now.
Yeah. I mean, your writing's been compared to Jonathan Swift, Evelyn Waugh, even Shaw. Not bad company.
Very flattering, yes.
Yeah. Sounds also like it would make, I haven't read it yet, and I promise to, that it sounds like it would make a good black comedy. Maybe like Arthur Hiller's The Hospital.
I can't say much about this, but there is a negotiation going on.
Oh, wonderful.
To make it into a TV series, which I think would be perfect for it.
And you are the man who wrote Doctor in the House, so you...
Yes, but I wouldn't be the showrunner. I'm too old to be a showrunner, I think. It's... The hours are impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I would just be an executive producer and be consulted about things. I would like that.
So are you planning any other films?
Yes, I have 2 films that I've written that both have producers and are seeking funds.
Wonderful.
But we'll see.
Okay. You're still going, Jonathan.
Oh, yes.
It's been a long journey. And you're still plugging.
There's nothing. That's what I do. I mean, you know what I mean? That's what I do. I get up in the morning and I go to my desk, unless I'm shooting something or directing a play, and I write something because that's
wonderful.
It's an addiction, really. I think it's a habit.
It's admirable.
Well, it's not really. It's just.
This is just to get out of it, just to have something to do.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I want to thank.
I mean, I don't play golf. I mean, what else do you do at my age?
I want to thank too our mutual pal Rick Unger for introducing us and helping make this interview happen.
Oh well, yes, it's good.
We love Rick.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's been fantastic. There's so much that we didn't get to because it's been such a long career. I mean, we barely touched on Clue.
I'm talking too much. I'm sorry.
No, there's so much there.
And this, we have to use our cliche. We barely scraped the surface.
You're a fun guest to research. I mean, and we didn't get into, of course, your iconic series, Yes, Minister, and Yes, Prime Minister, and all of that other stuff. But come back and we'll do another one.
I'll be happy to. It's been great fun. Thank you.
Talk about David Lean and Hitchcock and Wilder and your favorite movies.
Sure.
And Gilbert will tell you his insane theory about Sunset Boulevard.
Oh, can I hear it now?
Okay, yeah, let's hear it now. Okay. This is a story I heard recently. I mean, about, I don't know, a year or two ago. That, according to this story, women back then, rich women in crazy Hollywood, would buy chimps. And in the movie, she has a funeral for a chimp that she's in love with. And according to
you know where he's going with this, John?
No, I don't.
According to the story, these chimps were trained to perform cunnilingus on these old rich women.
I would have thought that would be very dangerous. I mean, chimps are quite hostile animals.
They're vicious animals.
Yeah, these women must have been absolutely nuts.
It must have been the excitement and the danger that maybe.
It stems from this notion that Wilder supposedly, if you believe this, gave Gloria Swanson a direction.
Yeah, he said to her, he goes, remember, you are fucking the chimp. Allegedly, that was the direction he gave her.
And we'll never know.
Well, we'll never know, will we?
Izzy Diamond's gone. They're all gone. Brackett. I guess Brackett wrote that one.
But so this is called the Cunnilingus Chimps. We've nicknamed
That's his theory.
On the show.
Yeah, they were the Lost Ed Sullivan Act. The Cunnilingus Chimps. What's the reason to have you back?
Well,
and more to talk about.
When you're more educated on the Cunnilingus Chimps, we'll have you back.
Oh, well, is there more to learn about them?
Okay.
And I also want to plug your comedy rules book, which we've touched on here, but which was just a lot of fun and valuable to myself as a comedy writer. I think to anybody that wants to be in comedy.
Oh, good.
It's lessons learned over your career, over a lifetime of having done this.
It is. It was somebody asked me to write a book about the rules of comedy, and I said I can't do it. There aren't any. And then I was teaching at AFI, and I realized that what I was saying to the students was something like the rules of comedy. So I phoned the publisher back and said, I can't write about the rules of comedy, but I can write about my rules of comedy. So that's what it is. And then they said, they said, how long is it going to be? And I said, 10 pages maybe. You know, like Elmore Leonard's book about the 10 rules of writing. And they said, no, it's got to be a book. It's got to be a whole book. Can you fill it out with stories about how you found these rules? So that's how the book.
Yeah, it's filled with great stories.
Can you share some of them with
like
us
William Goldman's
right
book, really. Adventures in the Screen Trade. It reads like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Rules plus.
Well, that's a great compliment. Thank
rules
you.
plus anecdotes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you tell us just a handful of these rules?
Oh, gosh. I wrote it some years ago.
Well, we mentioned, too, you said that all comedians were angry people.
Yes.
And that there's no such thing as bad taste. And the third one that stuck with me was that all comics fear the audience.
Well, that's right. That's why they have to kill them. It's kill or be killed, right?
Yes.
Here's a man who goes up every night, every week,
Well,
in front of a live audience.
It's kill or be killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've just got to kill them. It's not enough. A draw is not a suitable outcome. It's not satisfactory for anybody.
It's a wonderful read, and I can't wait to read Samaritans.
Good. I
And
hope
I hope
you
it
enjoy
turns
it.
into a series.
Okay, so this has been Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast with my co-host Frank Santopadre, and we have been talking to the great Jonathan Lynn.
Jonathan, this was fun and entertaining and educational, too,
Well, thank you very much. It was fun for me.
as was doing the research.
You guys are good, fun to talk to.
Thanks. So to our listeners, read Comedy Rules, see Greedy and Distinguished Gentlemen, and I know they've seen the other ones.
And learn about cunnilingus chimps.
Yeah, that's not in any of my writing. Just want to make that clear. That's Gilbert.
Thank you, Jonathan.